Okay. Bum. What's going on, everybody? How are we doing? We are live here on YouTube. What is it? It is, first off, Happy New Year, everybody. Happy New Year 2025. What is it? Friday, January 10th here. First off, anyone in California and around the LA area, I hope you guys are staying safe. It is absolutely crazy out there. So sending a lot of love to anyone who's in California, in around the LA area. Hopefully you are safe. I'm in Palm Desert right now, which is 2 hours east of LA. So no smoke around here, but it's absolutely crazy there in LA. So sending a lot of love to anyone who's in LA, who's around the LA area. Absolutely wild what's going on. What a start to 2025, hey? Just exactly the start that we needed. So anyways, but wishing everyone a happy new year. If you guys are watching this right now, let me know where you guys are coming in from. If you guys are watching this live, let me know where in the world are you coming in from. Actually feels a little bit strange doing this because it's been about 3 weeks. It's been over 3 weeks. I think it's been like 3.5 weeks since I've gone live on YouTube. So it kind of feels like, oh, like what the fuck is this? Just haven't done this in a while. So it feels a little bit strange. So here we are. I'll get used to it quickly though. So here we are, everyone. If you are tuning in live, I would love to, you can put your name where you're watching live from in the chat section. And if you're watching the replay, you won't be able to do that. So you can just watch me just kind of talk about what I'm going to talk about here. So welcome everyone to today's live, the first live of 2025. Hope everyone had a good holiday break. Hope everyone, Santa was good to them. Hopefully you lit all fucking 7 candles of that menorah, whatever you celebrate, whatever you believe in. I hope you had a good New Year's. Here we are, 2025. It feels like it's going to be a big year. So it feels like it's going to be a really, really big year this year, 2025. So I'm not a big numerology person. So I think with this live, we'll start here. I'm not a big numerology person, but 2025 apparently is a year 9. And a year 9 is all about completion. It's all about tying up loose ends so you can move into the new sort of numerology cycle. And so this live is not going to be about numerology, but I think it's important just to note that I know so many people in 2024, myself included, it felt like one big sort of contraction. We went through this year in 2024 that felt like one big contraction where all of our unworthiness was coming up, all the karma that we hadn't dealt with, all the deepest sort of ancestral pieces that we hadn't healed and sort of looked at were coming through in 2024. And so basically everything that is no longer serving us in 2024 started to just rise to the surface. We're like, oh shit, I got to look at this. I got to tend to this. I got to sort of heal this. And so now, and relating to the numerology sort of cycle as we move into 2025, this is going to be a year, they say a year 9 is a lot about spiritual ascension. It's a lot about healing. It's a lot about growth. It's a lot about wrapping up and tying up sort of loose ends so you can sort of move into the new cycle. And so this year is going to be a massive year of spiritual ascension for so many of us. We're moving into sort of this new year of 2025, which is going to be a massive year. So what it feels like this year is going to be a combination of whatever is no longer serving us, whatever like our higher self or our highest timeline, whatever we're trying to step into, whatever is no longer serving us, whatever sort of habits, actions, behaviors, ways of being, ways of thinking, stories, whatever it might be, what is no longer serving us is going to be really, really front and center for us to address. And we're going to be asked, do you want to kind of continue to carry this story, or do you want to let this story go? Do you want to carry this habit or behavior, or do you want to let this go? Do you want to step into something new? And so it's going to be a real sort of divide with sort of wrapping things up while simultaneously sort of stepping into what we're destined to step into sort of what we're called to step into. So it's going to be this real sort of bridge sort of year, this sort of transitory year where we're really trying to move into sort of a new paradigm and a new imprint. I don't know how you guys feel watching this, but basically, and I've talked to a few people about this, and it's been coming up in my clients and in sort of the client calls that I've had to sort of start off this year. But the calendar flipping to 2025 basically felt like it was moving into a new dimension. It felt really, really clear cut. You know, I had this building for a while in my space, 2025, like source God, whatever you want to call it, whispering to me, this is it. This is it. 2025. This is the year. This is it. This is it. And when I say this is it, what I mean is so much change and shifts is going to begin to happen. It makes sense moving into a year 9, trying to transit into a year 1, that we're moving into a space where we're cleaning up everything in our life that we need to clean up. And they also say in a year 9, there's so much growth that happens, so many shifts, so many changes that happen in multiple areas of your life. Almost like every single area of your life sort of shifts simultaneously in sort of this holistic sort of dynamic sort of transitory change. But when the calendar shifted to 2025, so many experiences that I had in 2024 instantaneously felt like they were in another dimension. So I don't know if anyone watching this felt this with the year 2024. 2024, for me personally, it brought up so much deep unworthiness where I'm like, where the fuck does this unworthiness come from? You know what I mean? The point where so much unworthiness was coming up, and like, where does this unworthiness come from? It was so deep. It was so big. It was so giant. And here's the thing, you guys, when unworthiness comes up that feels so big, it feels so fucking daunting, it feels so luminous, all signs are pointing to it's not ours, or it's not just ours. So much of working in ancestral energy is about being able to feel into the size of the energy. And when something is moving through that feels so big to the point that you almost can't sit with it, that's how we know something is ancestral. That's how we know that something is generational, that it's been there for a long time, that it didn't just start with us. Perhaps what happened in our lifetime is we are replaying and recreating certain aspects of this story, but it's not just ours because it's that big. Also, what probably would have happened in 2024, things like your propensity towards certain addictions would have come up, ways that you would have self-soothed and self-comforted came up. And so many people are like, okay, all my unworthiness is coming to the surface. It feels like my life is over. It feels like my life is ending. It feels like I'm moving backwards. But actually what happens, and this is how spirit and source works, that when a big shift is about to take place, everything gets really, really tight. You know what I mean? And I think I posted about this in my stories, but it's almost like this pressure cooker. Everything begins to contract and get really, really tight before it expands. So 2024, you can almost think of it like this perpetual repetitive contraction, particularly the latter half of 2024, that never really let up. And what essentially was happening was the deepest unworthiness of your ancestors was coming up in your space. When we say the deepest unworthiness, a big thing that drives the unworthiness is a story. There are these stories that replay through your ancestors. This story like, I'll never be able to do this. I'll never be able to have that. This always happens. This always, whatever it might be. There are these stories that imprint. And what happens is we're trying to let go of these stories, right? So stories and emotions work together. There's sort of this synchronistic sort of thing where the story creates the emotion creates a story, the unworthiness creates a story, the story creates the unworthiness, and they sort of work together. And so we have all these ancestral stories. A big reason why we struggle to let go of ancestral energy is because we don't know who we are without that story. We don't know who we are without that identity. Our ego, we don't know who we are without that identity. So we hold on to it. We hold on to it because we found some value from it. Our ego has found some sort of identification with that story. And if we let that story go, who the fuck are we? This is what it means to move into the divine. You let go of all stories that have plagued you internally that are no longer serving. All the ways that your ego has extorted sort of value that doesn't work for you, you let it go. Now it's the wide open. Everything feels empty. And this is confusing. This is confusing because what we're having to do is we're having to shift our relationship to the unknown. We don't know what it really means. When we're in the unknown, when everything sort of feels empty, what it really means, you guys, is that the ego is releasing an identification to a story that is no longer serving us. And these stories of the ego that are no longer serving us, what is tied to these stories is our deepest unworthiness. These stories get imprinted like fossils of generation after generation after generation, being imprinted into your flesh, being imprinted into your DNA. When we release this story, we move into the wide open. Now we're having to reshape our relationship to the unknown. This is why it can be sort of confusing, right? Because now the ways that the ego has sort of extorted and found value through the lineage and through these sort of ways that we've gotten used to, they fall away. We're like, who am I? This is where the divine begins. This is where we're moving into a space of creation for the first time, where it feels like we don't know what's happening. We don't know what comes next. Everything feels like a wide open space. This is where the divine begins. See, what happens, you guys, we're always doing one of two things. You're either recreating or you're creating. You're either recreating or you're creating. The majority of the population lives in a perpetual space of some form of recreation. We recreate our suffering. We recreate the stories. We recreate the limitations. We recreate the confines. So what happens is our soul lives in sort of this cage that is not able to expand in sort of infinite potential and capacity. So we're either recreating or we're creating. What happened in 2024 was we were trying to move to the end of recreation so we could finally open the body up, the body and the vessel up to a space of creation that has never existed before inside of us, but also inside of your lineage. So as all this karma sort of rises, 2024, it felt like this perpetual sort of contraction where everything was coming up in your body and we felt like we were taking 10 steps backwards. What might have happened in 2024 is you might have felt like you were taking 10 steps backwards. Essentially, what was happening was the deepest karma of the lineage that was leaving you to still be in some space of recreation and stagnation was being brought up in your body and space. Think of it like all the debris that is living below the surface, all elements of the iceberg that are underneath the water that are no longer serving you, that have lived for generations, were now coming to the surface. This is why so often when our deepest unworthiness comes up, we feel like we're moving backwards. We feel like we're not moving forwards. We're like, okay, all this is coming up. I had felt all of this growth. I had felt all this transformation. I was moving forward in these ways, but now I'm feeling all of this. What does this mean? What it just means is you're accessing a deeper and a deeper layer so that you can move into a deeper expression of who you are. So 2024, the deepest unworthiness was coming up, and that unworthiness was showcasing where you were still living in patterns of recreation, stagnation, and being idle in your system. So now as we think about shifting to 2025, basically what it's trying to do, what Spirit's trying to say to you, will you fully walk through the door of your new life? Will you fully walk through the door of your new life? Because as everything rose in 2024, all the deepest unworthiness, all the terror, the anguish, the fear, it was all being brought up so that it could move and purge and be excavated through your system so that you could finally move and you could actually move forward. So 2025, what it's asking you is, will you finally move forward in your life in ways that you haven't been able to move forward? Will you have the courage and the ferocity to step into your new life? There is a new life that is trying to break through. When I say a new life, what I really mean is your soul's aura and your expansion. Because what happens when you really step forward is your aura and your soul expands all around you. Your aura and your soul expands all around you. And what happens when your aura and your soul expands all around you is you see yourself so clearly. You see yourself so truly. There's no part of you that you don't see. Do you guys understand this? When you shift a dimension or an orbit, all that's really changing is you're seeing yourself more clearly. I'll repeat that again. Do you understand that when you shift a timeline, when you move into a different dimension or orbit, all that's changing is you're seeing yourself more clearly? I'll put that in another way. You're seeing yourself more clearly. Actually, what's happening is that your energetic field is getting bigger and it is getting stronger. What happens when you shift the timeline and move into a different orbit, and it feels like other people or other experiences that you've had are in another dimension? What that actually means is that you're in yourself more than you ever have been. You're deeper and you're wider. You're deeper and you're wider in yourself. So now your aura is expanding more around you. Your soul, your frequency of who you are is taking up more space. So now what happens is your through line to you, your through line to source, and the authenticity in which you see both is so pure. It's so clean. And so now other experiences that were directed by karma, they seem so far away because you've inhabited more of your truth and your authenticity. And what you've really done is you've shifted karma to the divine. You've shifted karma to the divine. So what happens when karma begins to integrate? Energy is freed up. Think about what happens when you shift karma. There's energy that happens. When we're living in patterns of recreation, it's stifling. It feels like we're in a cage. We feel energetically exhausted, like we have nothing to give, that we have nothing that we can access. But when we shift karma to divine energy or God frequency or our soul's aura, all of a sudden we have so much more energy that we have access to. We're like, what the fuck? You might even notice when you're shifting karma, you can't sleep at night. You might feel like a little bit manic. You're like, why does my energy feel so fucking crazy? It feels like I'm on caffeine all the time. It feels like I'm on drugs. What is happening? What it really means is there's the karma has shifted to the divine. There has been a transmutation that has happened, and you're inhabiting more of you. So as karma shifts to the divine, it's okay for you to take up more space. It's okay for you to expand your frequency. And now what happens, these other experiences you might have had that you were in a cage or you were stifled or you're energetically in a contraction, they feel like they're in a different orbit because of the frequency that you're now in. Because what you've done is you've taken that karma and you've shifted that to divine energy inside of yourself. So those other experiences seem so far away. They seem like they're in another space and time. You know, you might think about even like a past relationship or something, and you're like, God, that relationship was only a year ago, but it seems like another lifetime. It seems like another dimension because the frequency that you're now in is so different than the frequency that you were in when you were inside of that relationship. And so what's really trying to happen in this year as we move into 2025 is all this energy is trying to be freed up inside of yourself. All this energy is trying to be freed up inside of yourself. All this energy that was biding time in the contraction, all that unworthiness that was coming up into your space. And here's the thing, you guys, when you sit in unworthiness for long enough, When you sit in unworthiness for long enough, something magical really, really starts to happen. If you can sit in the unworthiness for long enough, that unworthiness begins to shift into empowerment. It begins to shift into a rising within yourself. But what happens is most people don't sit in the unworthiness long enough. They don't sit in the unworthiness deep enough. They begin to scratch up to the unworthiness. They begin to feel up to it, and they run away. They soothe, and they move into some form of comfort, some form of medicating that unworthiness, which what it does is it perpetually just creates some form of stagnation. If we're able to sit in that unworthiness for long enough, and we're able to move deep enough into that unworthiness, now something can start to break through. Now something can start to break through. What is happening now as we move into the year 2025 is we're trying to open up the body and vessel to who we are on the other side of our deepest unworthiness. What happens when you allow the deepest sort of possible unworthiness of your ancestors and those stories that have plagued you? Essentially, what it means is, where in your life have you been the most stagnant? Where in your life have you not been able to move forward? Where in your life have you felt like you've been stuck? What happened in 2024 was the deepest unworthiness of that, the deepest energy and karma of those ways that you were stuck came up in the body in 2024, and it was on the surface. That's why it felt like we were moving backwards, because we're like, I feel awful. I feel terrible. I feel so much fucking anguish. I feel depressed. I feel anxiety. I feel miserable. What is happening to me? What it just means is that everywhere that you had been stagnant or frozen or paralyzed and unable to move came to the surface. It came to the surface and was like, look at me. Look at this. Allow yourself to sit in this. That's what happened in 2024. Allow yourself to sit in this. Sit in everything that is coming up. And what happens here is it becomes this massive opportunity, right? And the question is, are people going to continue to recreate, or are they going to move into a new pattern of creation? Are they going to move into their divine potential, or are they going to continue to replay and repeat the karma and continue to suffer in some form or another? And so if we were able to sit in that, and when we're able to sit in that and shift the unworthiness, again, karma is able to integrate into divine energy, and something's able to break through and break free. So what happens as that karma and that energy is able to break through, and you sit in that unworthiness for long enough, something magical starts to open. There's a level of clarity that moves through your body. There's a level of permission and allowance that you begin to feel internally that you hadn't felt before. What you actually feel is you start to see yourself in a new way than you've ever been able to see yourself. I said this to a client recently. What it means to be spiritually tapped in is really, really simple. What it means to be spiritually tapped in is really simple. Your capacity to be spiritually tapped in is your capacity to be authentic. Your capacity to be spiritually tapped in is your capacity to be authentic. You know, when you talk about someone who is spiritually gifted or has spiritual powers, what it really just means is authenticity. That's all that it means. It just means their capacity to be as pure and truly authentic in the vibration of their spirit as possible. And the more that we're authentically true and authentic in our own vibration and spirit, the more connected to God we are, the more connected to source we are. That is actually how we begin to channel God, as we live as our own sort of unique vibration so purely and authentically. And so as you talk about stepping into your new life, what it's asking you, the most authentic possible version of you, whatever that authentic version of you, will you allow that to come through in your life? This year, 2025, the most authentic and true version of yourself, will you allow that to come through your body and into your life? Or are you going to cage it? Or are you going to resist it? Will you allow the most authentic version of your spirit that is trying to come through? So what happens? Unworthiness is the block. We don't feel worthy to live in the authenticity of us. We don't feel worthy to live in the authenticity of us. We'll be too much. We'll piss people off. That we'll fail. That we won't be loved. That we'll be abandoned. The block and the barrier to your spiritual gifts and your true innate authenticity is your unworthiness. When you can sit in your unworthiness, now it begins to fall away and it begins to integrate. And now it feels safe to expand your aura, your soul, and to live in the true authenticity of who you are. That's the invitation that is coming through as you move into 2025 is, will you live as the most unique and authentic version of yourself? Will you live as the most expansive, energetic capacity of who you are? You know, people talk about, and I know things like God and the divine has a lot of trauma wrapped around it from people who had different religious upbringings. But the way I interpret it, and really the way that I truly think it is that when you're living in your full-blown authenticity, you're living in the embodiment of that frequency. You were an open vessel and channel to that when you're living in the true authenticity of who you are. When someone's tapped in, it doesn't mean they're woo-woo. When someone's spiritually gifted, all it means is they're authentic. Think about what happens, you guys, when you go through a spiritual awakening. The first step through a spiritual awakening is you're seeing things, and it's really uncomfortable because you're seeing what you're doing is you're seeing truth. You know, you might look at a couple and you see the disconnection and you see it so fucking clearly. Or you might see the misalignments in your life so clearly. Maybe nothing is shifting or nothing is changing. You have all this fear that you're holding. But the first step is you see something. You see it, right? This is why I always talk about a spiritual awakening is your capacity to see. A spiritual initiation is your capacity to live. A spiritual awakening is your capacity to see. A spiritual initiation is your capacity to live. A spiritual awakening is the lenses in which you see, the consciousness in which starts to come through you. The spiritual initiation is the embodiment. It's the execution and the action of truth. It's the execution and the action of truth. The awakening is the observation. The awakening is the observation. This is how when someone's going through awakening, their life doesn't really shift, but they're seeing things. And they're seeing their patterns so clearly. Maybe they're still living all these patterns, but it's getting uncomfortable. It's getting uncomfortable. And now the initiation is the capacity to move, the capacity to move forward and finally be able to take action. And so what happened in 2024 is that we were seeing things so clearly. It was all about sight. It was all about the observation of something. Something was coming into your space. Are you going to see it? Are you going to see it? And the integration of that sight, the embodiment of that sight is the initiation. Initiation is all about, are you ready to move with the divine? Are you ready to actually finally move with truth? Sight, observation is step one. Action, execution, moving forward is the initiation of it. And so 2025 is going to be about movement. Are you ready to move forward to what you see? Are you ready to live the truth of what you see? Because we talk about being spiritually fucking enlightened or spiritually embodied. What does that mean? It means two things: capacity to see and the capacity to live. The capacity to see and the capacity to live. It means you see something and you have the embodiment and the capacity internally inside of yourself to move with what you see, to live as the truth in which you know, right? This is why typically what happens through an awakening process, we get really uncomfortable. We get really uncomfortable. We're seeing things, but we're not acting. We're seeing things, but we're not shifting. We're observing something, but we're not integrated in that truth, right? We're not integrated in that truth. And so to become spiritually embodied becomes, can you act on the truth in which you see? So now 2024, as we think about all this unworthiness that was coming up in your space, it was really, really uncomfortable. So the question is, what did you really, really see in 2024? This past year, what was so alarmingly evident and aware to you in your space and body that you can't ignore? Your capacity to create the life that you want and step into your power is going to be, are you willing to step through the door of that truth? Are you ready to fully fucking walk through that door? Or are you going to continue to stay in stagnation, stay idle, right? Stay idle. Continue to see what you're seeing, but not change anything, but not shift anything, right? And so the invitation again is, can you live the truth that you now know? Can you live that truth that you now know? The truth that is absolutely undeniable in your space and body. And that's where it begins to integrate. That's where your spirituality begins to live all through your cells, and it begins to live all through your body, is where you're actually living that truth. That's what it means to be quote unquote spiritually powerful. You're living your truth. That's all that it means, is you're living your truth. You see things, you feel things, and you act on what you see and feel. You live as this direct line to truth. That's all that it means. It means people that are spiritually gifted and spiritually tapped in, is they're just living as their authenticity. They don't question it. Things come into their space and they act on those things. And what they do is they create from those places, which is how you create a life that's in alignment, which is how you create a life that is totally magical, which is how you fully fucking step into your power. And so the invitation again this year is, can you walk through the door of your new life? There is something that is trying to break through and break free in your life. Are you willing to fully walk through that door? What it means is that you're going to have to let go of all the self-soothing and comforts that you have held on to from your old life. Everywhere that your soul and spirit has diluted your own authenticity, everywhere your soul and spirit has diluted your authenticity, are you willing to let go of it? Because you are being invited to fully let go and experience the world as a raw vibrational frequency. So what happens when you live so authentically? You're living totally fucking raw. Your soul is ripe. Your soul is naked. You're experiencing everything so pure and true. So all the ways that you have held on to comfort, all the ways that you have tried to soothe, right? So why are we holding on to comfort? Why are we trying to soothe? We're trying to negotiate a sense of unworthiness. We're trying to not have to feel something. We're trying to not have to alchemize or process a sense of unworthiness. So we're trying to negotiate. We're pleading. We're soothing. We're comforting. And when we do that, there's a level of authenticity, a level of our own sort of aura expansion that we're not allowing to happen. Because what happens when we allow that aura to really come through, we become undeniable. It becomes unfucking shakeable in our space. That what we see now begins to live so loud within us that we can't ignore it anymore and we can't go backwards. So we're almost afraid to really allow that unworthiness to alchemize, because then everything starts to change. We can no longer go back to our old life, and we fully begin to move into this new life. And so now we're in this bridge right now where we're having to totally let go of your old life, everything in your old life, everything that tethered you and binded you to your old life. And what I mean by that is all the stories, all the ways that you've held on to these ancestral karmic contracts. All the ways that you've held on to these ancestral karmic contracts in your body are trying to now be dispelled through you so that you can move into a brand new space where now it's going to feel wide open. You're going to feel like you're in a brand new space. You're reborn. That the easel that you paint on is totally clear and you can do anything you want. The stories that governed you no longer seem as true anymore. You can do anything you fucking want. And now you paint at the easel with your authenticity. Now you paint at the easel of life with your authenticity. You could do whatever you want. You have to let go of every single comfort, every way that you soothe yourself. How do you comfort yourself? How do you avoid your deepest unworthiness? So 2024 was about, were you able to sit in the discomfort? Were you able to sit in the discomfort? And probably moving into 2025, a lot of those pieces of discomfort is going to continue to come. And it's going to ask you, can you sit in it? Because if you sit in it long enough, as I mentioned earlier, something magical starts to happen. If you sit in it long enough, the problem is most people don't sit in it long enough. They don't allow themselves to sit in it, or they don't sit in it long enough, right? We're in that space, right? We're in that space, discomfort. Something begins to break through, a level of clarity, a level of allowance and permission of something to break through in us, and we expand. And we start to see ourselves, and that's how you shift timelines. That's how you move into a whole different vibration orbit. This is where other people and experiences, relationships you have might feel in a different dimension. Like I said, every experience that I had in 2024 literally feels like it's in another dimension. It feels like it's in another dimension. Because the frequency that I'm now inhabiting already 10 days into this year, it was like a pop. It was like moving into a whole new level, just completely as the new year sort of shifted. As soon as the new year hit, I could feel it. Everything in 2024, it feels a million miles away. It feels in another lifetime, in another dimension. And the only reason is because of what I'm seeing in me, what I'm feeling in me, what I'm allowing in me, what I'm creating in me, what I'm cultivating in me. It's because my aura is all here. So I see myself so deeply. And there's a contract that's been broken. There's a karmic contract that has been broken, that maybe has been plagued for generations. And so when you shift a timeline, again, it's karma being completed in your body. And now that karma creates energy, which is why you expand and why you grow. So the karma completes. So you guys know that experience when all of a sudden you have all this energy, like, where'd this energy come from? That's karma being completed in your body. Now you have life force energy. You have this godly flow, this divine frequency. Your soul's aura is expanding all the way around you. You've just moved, you've shifted onto a new timeline. You moved into a new dimension. And that's why other experiences seem so far away. And that's what allows you to alchemize and grow at a quantum rate in your life when your body's clued in and cued into this process of how do you integrate unworthiness? And how do you integrate the unworthiness of your ancestors? Because the unworthiness is the block. The unworthiness is what makes us say, I can't live in the total vibration of me. I can't live in my total authenticity. And so the invitation for all of you who are watching this or listening to this is, are you willing and are you ready to fully step through the door of your new life? Are you ready? Are you willing to fully walk through the door of your new life? And when I say your new life, it is literally the allowance and permission of a frequency, an inhabitation of something inside of you that you're going to allow and you're going to claim, a level of authenticity that is going to be lived through you, that you won't deny any longer. You won't dilute. That you won't dilute. And it's going to require you to be raw with yourself. It's going to require you to not have those soothing and ways that we comfort, right? Because we have all these unconscious ways that we try to comfort, we try to soothe from not allowing a deeper process to take place. And ultimately, we don't allow this process to take place because we're afraid of our power. We're afraid of what our power might do. And we're afraid of the change that our power will elicit. We're afraid of the change that our power will elicit. Like, think about you in your life. If you went to your ultimate power, if you didn't hold any part of yourself back, if you allowed the authenticity of your aura to expand all around you, what would that change in your life? What would that shift? What would that disrupt? What sort of edges would that rub up against? What sort of logistical changes would take place? Because that is really what's being invited inside of you. It is spirit saying it's fucking time. It's spirit saying it is fucking time. You are no longer going to hold yourself back. 2024 was a contraction. 2024 brought up all the deepest karma that was still in the way of ways in your life that you were stuck. So so probably in 2024, the ways you were stuck, the comforts that you rely on probably became even stronger. You probably moved to them even more than you normally do. In 2024, the ways that you try to console yourself or comfort your little boy, your little girl, those probably came up even stronger. And that's probably why you felt potentially like you were taking a bunch of steps backwards, particularly in the latter half of 2024, because all the unworthiness, all the karma, the most uncomfortable feelings that were leading to you being stuck, that were leading to you being in stagnation came to the surface. This is usually why before our life really shifts, we usually get about as uncomfortable as we've ever been. Right? This is usually before our life shifts more than it's ever shifted. We usually get more uncomfortable than we've ever been. When we get more uncomfortable, this is why the transformational grist of spiritual awakening is suffering. The transformational grist of spiritual awakening is some form or variation of suffering that gets alchemized into levity. And so we have to sit in that suffering. We have to sit in that unworthiness to a certain depth and degree to be able to get to the alchemical shift that happens. This is why I always say to my clients, if you're feeling as uncomfortable as you've ever been, something's about to break through. Something's about to break. It's like the great big bang. When all this fucking pressure mounts, everything gets fucking, and then it explodes. And then everything pops. That's always what happens before a massive breakthrough happens, before a massive shift takes place. 2024 was like this big contraction, this pressure, where everything that was leading to your stagnation was coming up so you could see it. Again, 2024, you might have felt like, why do I feel so fucking unworthy? And you might have been confused, right? You might have been confused. And I say to people, it's because it's not yours, or it's not just yours. The level of unworthiness that you were dealing with is your lifetime and all your ancestors' lifetimes. I guarantee the unworthiness that was coming up in your body in 2024 was not just yours. It was all your entire lineage. It was everything that kept you binded and tethered to the lineage, ways that you still kept in the suffering of the lineage. That's the level of unworthiness that you were feeling in 2024. And that's why it was so fucking difficult. That's why people were suffering. That's why people were in anguish. And so it's confusing and disorienting because we're like, why do I feel so awful? Where's this coming from? And what it just means is it's actually a privilege to be able to access that material, but we don't think about it at the time when we're in it. When we feel so awful, we don't think about that. We think, I feel terrible. I feel so dense in my body, right? I feel so dense in my body. I didn't want this to be over. But we don't realize that if we're accessing something, it means we're actually ready to heal it. And it means we're actually ready to shift it. And so in 2024, you were accessing so much density. It meant you were actually capable and ready. And spirit was like, you're ready to heal something that your entire lineage hadn't been able to heal. But now it was coming up in you, which meant that you were finally able to fucking shift it. You were finally able to heal it. And it was coming up because it was ready to shift. Something was ready to break. A cord was ready to snap. Something was ready to pop. And so as that unworthiness came up, all your coping mechanisms probably were on display internally inside of you, probably fueled guilt and shame. You probably felt so much shame in your body in 2024. If you really felt that unworthiness, you felt a lot of fucking shame. Underneath that shame is the pain. Shame is holding those deeper emotions hostage. There's some deeper pain some grief, some anger underneath that, some anguish, some terror, fear underneath that shame that is trying to move. It's trying to move through you. And so you could shift a pattern. And what it's trying to say is, are you really going to step into this new life that is trying to break through? This really authentic life. This really authentic life that is trying to break through for you and through you. Will you finally do it? You're being asked to get out of stagnation. You're being asked to, where have you been stuck? You're being asked to fucking move. This year, 2025, is about the embodiment and integration of what you saw and what you've seen. Again, 2024 felt a little more observational and sitting with a lot with what was coming. 2025 feels a lot more of like the integration and embodiment and beginning to really shift and move, right? So as this deepest ancestral unworthiness came up, a lot of it is as started to move through, and it's going to continue to probably come up this year at different times. And it's being asked to integrate. And so these contracts of old, outdated sort of karmic patterns with the ancestors are being asked to be completed so you can step into whatever your destiny is, whatever you're meant to do, because you're fucking chosen. Whatever you're meant to do, whatever you're meant to create, whatever's meant to live through you is being asked to now start to come into fruition. So 2025, again, is a lot of, will you move forward? Where you haven't been able to move, will you finally move? Where you've been stuck, will you allow yourself to finally become unstuck? That's what 2025 is going to be about. Will you move forward? Will you walk through the fucking door? Because your new life is here right now. Your new life is here right now. And if you're watching this and listening to this and resonating with this, you probably have some inclination or idea what that is. And as I always say to my clients, we don't even have to have a whole picture. We just have to have a thread or a cord. A thread or a cord. And when you follow that thread and cord, the next thread and cord is revealed and revealed until the picture starts to form. But all that we're given in the beginning is a thread or a cord. And so you have to, so I ask you guys, in 2025, what is that thread and cord in your life that you're being asked to fully move towards? That you're being asked to fully claim with total permission and total allowance? Because that thread and cord is the divine sort of laying out a little yellow brick road that is going to expand, but you have to walk towards it. You have to follow it. And that's what we're given in the beginning. That's what we're given in the beginning. And our capacity to become integrated and embody is how do we get these threads and cords, and then we move towards these threads and cords. We get these threads and cords, we kind of get the download, or we get sort of the observation, or I see something. And then we move towards it and we're like, holy shit, look what I created. Look how I feel internally. Look what's happening with my energy. Whatever it might be, there's something internally that you're feeling that becomes undeniable, unshakable, that you begin to trust and build more of these muscles. Okay, that's how spirit speaks. That's how God sort of talks to me. And so you're being asked to move and walk through that fucking door. Again, 2024 was observation. Step one of the spiritual awakening process is your capacity to observe and see. This is why before our life really changes, we get really, really uncomfortable. We see things in a way we've never seen them before. All it means to be spiritually tapped in is to be authentic. It means that you see truth. To go through a spiritual awakening is you see truth in a way you've never seen it before. Your capacity to be spiritually embodied, integrate, to move through an initiation is you're living that truth so undeniably in your flesh and your cells. That's the difference between the two. The awakening is the sight and the observation, and the initiation is the integration and the embodiment of that truth. And so what's happening, 2024 shifting in 2025, is so much of what we've been dealing with has been working at an ancestral level. And it's been about clearing ancestral unworthiness, which also relates to your own lifetime, because you're going to recreate these patterns of unworthiness through your own sort of relationships and coping mechanisms and self-soothing habits and whatever it might be, patterns of repression, of not allowing yourself to move into your power and be fully expressed, whatever it might be. And so clearing this ancestral energy so that you can now move into a space where you're actually able to authentically create the life that is so true for you, that is so true for you. So your gifts and talents and whatever those are can come together in a way that you've never allowed them to come together before. And so that's what's trying to break through right now. So the invitation is, will you allow yourself to fully walk through the door of your new life? Will you allow yourself to move forward in the ways that you haven't been able to move? Will you allow this to be the year where you finally become unstuck? Or ways that you've been stagnant in your life? Will you allow yourself to finally move in those ways? Will you give yourself permission? Because your new life is waiting. And your new life is going to cost you your old life. And your new life is going to cost you all the ways that you've tried to comfort and soothe yourself, all the little safety blankets that you've held on to that have tied you to your old life. And those safety blankets, those self-soothing comforts are ways that you're holding on to your old life. And it's also ways that you're fighting against your unworthiness from truly coming to the surface. And as that unworthiness truly comes to the surface, we anticipate it's going to be awful. But really what happens, and those ways that we comfort and self-soothe, we're like, oh my God, all my unworthiness is going to come up. And sure, it does, but it alchemizes. So actually what we're more afraid of is not the unworthiness, but actually what happens when we no longer hold on to that unworthiness. I'm going to say that again. What we're actually more afraid of is not the unworthiness, but what happens when we no longer have that unworthiness to hold on to. Because when we no longer have that unworthiness to hold on to, it puts us into a whole different space than we've ever been. It puts us into a whole different frequency and vibration where everything from our old life will feel like it's in another dimension. Everything from the old world that we come from, everything from the old timeline where we come from will feel like it's in another dimension. So the ways that we self-soothe, the ways that we comfort, the ways that we hold on to the safety blankets, they're how we're holding on to our old life. It's how we're avoiding the unworthiness from coming to the surface. More importantly, it's how we're avoiding, and we're avoiding the anticipation and the fear of what happens when that unworthiness goes away and dispels and falls away. And now we feel as good as we're capable of feeling. And we move into a space where everything that was in that old world that we left behind feels like it's in a completely different dimension. Feels like it's on a completely different timeline. And that's what we're afraid of. We're afraid to feel that. What happens when I feel so myself and I feel everything? And again, it's because you have to grieve what you're leaving behind. You have to say goodbye to what you're leaving behind. And that unworthiness that ties us to our old life, ties us to the old paradigm. When you let go of those soothing and those comforts, that unworthiness will alchemize really, really fucking quickly. And when it does, everything we're stepping into will become so clear and so fucking undeniable. That's what we're afraid of. All right, everyone. I'm going to leave it there for today's live. Look at that. 111. 111, baby. Angels. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, for those of you who tuned in to watch this, listen to this, whether you stayed for the whole thing or just watched parts of it or bits and pieces of it. I appreciate your guys' presence here. If you guys aren't subscribed to my channel, I would love for you guys to subscribe to my channel so you can be notified when I'm going live, when I have new videos dropping. Please like this video, guys, if you resonated with it, if you connected with it, and send it to someone who might resonate with some of the things I talked about with shifting into 2025, moving into sort of this new cycle, moving into sort of this new timeline, this new space, the shift and shifts that I have felt from 2024, 2025, which basically I've arrived at through what I feel personally, through talking to so many people, through what's coming up in my client sessions. There's these patterns and patterns and patterns. This is usually what brings me to these insights of what I'm feeling and what I'm being guided and directed by source, and usually the same patterns come up with all my clients and people that I'm mentoring. So yeah, so I thought this would resonate with people. So much love, everyone. And again, moving forward in the new year, I'm going to be doing these lives once a week, every Friday at this time, 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And I'm going to be dropping some other content, but we'll be doing one live a week on Fridays moving forward. Yeah, so I think that's it. So wishing everyone wonderful weekend. Oh, you're so welcome, Robin. Thank you for being here. Hope you had a great holidays and start to your new year. Fuck, it's already It's already like middle of January almost. Isn't that crazy? Time flies. All right, be safe, everyone. Wishing you guys a great weekend, and we'll see you next Friday.